Hi everyone, I'm Touba Ghadessi, and I immediately give a caveat that I am not a Lovecraft expert in any shape or form, so please forgive this massive lack in my education. What I intend to do today is essentially to go over rather quickly the history of monsters in the Renaissance and how they're represented. And I think as I read a few stories of Lovecraft, I saw a lot of parallels in what he was doing, how he was creating monsters, and essentially the history in which he is inscribing himself, not taking away from his originality, but interestingly seeing that his creations, in a sense, do match a rhetorical frame that has been established for centuries before him. And hopefully in some of the monsters that I will show, you might see some connections. I'm thinking in particular to the Dagon stories and sort of the marine monsters and hybridity in particular. So hopefully there will be some connections that you will see, and we'll point them out as we go through. In 1560, Pierre Boissieu wrote that monsters were a source of pleasure, horror, and admiration. And indeed, fascination with monsters was a large part of Renaissance culture. Culturally and visually, physically deformed individuals and imaginary monsters resided in three critical dimensions. First, they belonged to the scientific classification of monsters. Within the discourse on the monstrous, they were seen as either divine signs and theological omens, as curiosities of nature, and as pathological anomalies. And attention was paid to documenting specific anatomical features that made them into objects of wonder. Second, they were seen as comical implements in courtly culture, and what eventually became popular culture, and as such were associated with entertaining traditions. Finally, they were emblems and cultural markers of the social sphere in which they lived. These aspects overlapped with each other, and it is in portraits and depictions of monsters, literal and visual, that we see these components in conversation. Monsters became systematic objects of inquiry subject to the early modern scientific gaze. Just as medical anomalies framed the nature of the normative bodies for Renaissance philosophers and scientists, so too depictions of monsters reveal for the historian the true nature of normative constructions. Ultimately, these sources turned the fascination with monsters into an established science. Anatomical treatises, dialogues emanating from natural philosophy, and medical approaches allowed for the visualization and a discussion on monsters to occur. Textual descriptions of monsters emphasized graphic traits for the reader, and in tandem with visual representations, these studies became both titillating and instructive. As scientific interest in monsters' anatomy lent representations of monsters an element of documentary authenticity, these representations stood in as visual dissections, not only of monsters, but of monstrousness itself. Thus, the subject's monstrousness and deformities were rendered accessible to multiple viewers or readers who felt comforted that they were presented with accurate and true knowledge. So monsters only gradually became subjects of inquiry. One of the most important characteristics of the early modern discourse on monsters is the multiplicity of the sources that touch upon the subject. The diversity of visual representations and textual descriptions that invoke monsters ensured that their study was proportionally complex and multifaceted. Prior to the 16th and 17th centuries, various authors and publishers typically reproduced mythical images of monsters and slightly just rewrote accounts found in ancient texts. Increasingly, however, a great number of new images and texts dealing with recently discovered popular monsters began to appear, thus whetting popular interest in the monstrous. One of the most widely recognized and discussed early modern monsters was the famed papal ass, discussed notably by Martin Luther and Philippe Mélenchon. The papal ass was found on the banks of the Tiber River in Rome in 1495. 28 years later, both Luther and Mélenchon wrote an apocalyptic and anti-papal pamphlet that interpreted the details of the visual appearance of this monster as a portentous sign. From the head of the ass, symbolizing the divinely condemned pope, to the foot of the creature representing the corrupted servants of the church, each part of the monster, and even his death, which spoke to the end of the papacy, built on theological, secular, and political beliefs, thus appealing to a very large audience. These accounts serve as a testimony to the changing understanding of the relation between man and the divine, as defined by nature, and provide information regarding the place of the marvelous, the curious, and the scientific within an early modern conception of the entire world. From medical traditions that stem from ancient and medieval Renaissance sources, the theological disputes from antiquity to the Middle Ages, mythological writings from ancient authors, and the fantastic adaptations in the Middle Ages and popular culture, all of these fields informed the concept of monsters. As medical inquiries grew stronger during the 16th and the 17th centuries, fueled by first-hand anatomical observations, these components grew weaker in published works. The causes of monstrousness were not understood solely as the results of the opposition between devilish and divine forces, or only as the product of sympathetic magic during pregnancy, for instance. Methodical explanations were increasingly applied to shed light on the origins of physical deviance. Even though interest in the marvelous, rare, curious, and inexplicable never waned, rational scientific accounts added a new component to this pursuit. Indeed, the vacillation between popular imagination and systematic, medicalized explanations actively structured the public's and the experts' attention to monsters from the Renaissance onward. For instance, the story of the monster of Ravenna in the early 1600s touched the imagination of many people from Florence to Munich. This is another image. The monster's description is found, for instance, in the diary of Luca Randucci, an apothecary from Florence who wrote in 1512. We heard that a monster had been born at Ravenna, in which a drawing is sent here. It had horn on its head, straight up like a sword, and instead of arms, it had two wings like a bat's. And at the height of the breasts, it had a fire, a Y-shaped tunic, on one side and a cross on the other. And lower down at the waist, two serpents, and it was hermaphrodite. And on the right knee, it had an eye, and its left foot was like an eagle's. I saw it painted, and anyone who wished could see this painting in Florence. Because days later, the city of Ravenna fell to a coalition of papal Spanish and French troops, the birth of this monster was widely interpreted as a bad omen. This monster became instantly well known, thanks to flying broadsheet pamphlets that circulated widely at a fast pace. Combining religious fears with popular convictions and political thoughts, the monster of Ravenna became a perfect site for all these notions to coexist. And here I think we see a lot of parallels with monstrous constructions that continue through the ages. Different understandings of monsters were in fact not in competition, but rather complemented each other. It would be misguided to assume a teleological schema that charts an evolution of monstrous categories according to distinct time periods. For instance, it would be misleading to claim that the medieval audiences regarded monsters solely as signs of theological superstition, or that those of the early modern period understood the monster only as a source of delight and pleasure. Nor is it accurate to claim that suddenly, in the late 16th and 17th centuries, the monster became an object of medical and scientific inquiry. Rather, these epistemologies tended to overlap, often in socially or culturally expedient ways. This is particularly evident in early modern configurations where the monster begins to comprise an alternate body of knowledge that served in part to strengthen anatomical standard, such as those put forth by Andreas Vesalius. The normalizing discourse that framed anatomical inquiries turned the slightest deviation into an object of inquiry. Such deviations provided the exceptions needed to reinforce the structure of a new canon. Departures from the norm that serve strategically to delineate the boundaries of the very norms beyond which they were doomed to remain. I believe that the methodical examination of monsters' visible anomalies revealed a constructive intellectual system that affected the reality of monsters, but of non-monsters as well. It affected the collective imaginary tied to monsters and their subsequent visual translations. The images and texts that resulted from the study of monsters provided a model of knowledge that became a valid alternative to normative ideals of knowledge. The way in which monstrous bodies were explored echoed these practices and thus reinforced the epistemological maquette proposed by early modern dissections of normalized human bodies. And I think this is where we need to look at dissections for a little bit in order to understand how non-normative reinforces normative, and obviously how that has consequences beyond just the body, but politically, socially, and culturally as well. The fabrica, which we see here. So the early modern development of anatomical knowledge reached its peak in the middle of the 16th century. In 1543, Vesalius, this guy, published the first edition of his landmark, the Humanico Fabrica, a work that combined artistic originality with radical anatomical inquiry. Vesalius emphasized direct observation, eliminated the divisions of roles between the anatomist, the barber surgeon, and the pointer, made this practice part of the curriculum of academic teaching, and finally challenged the hegemony of the Hellenic tradition, which was very strong, very present since ancient times. Vesalius performed dissections that broke with tradition. He eradicated the variant channel that stood between the student of anatomy and the immediate knowledge the dissected body offered. This method allowed him to appreciate the numerous errors made by the ancient anatomist Galen and to challenge the textual basis of medieval medicine. The Fabrica, therefore, radically changed the way science and anatomy were taught and learned. The title page of the Fabrica is a woodcut showing a crowded public dissection in which Vesalius demonstrates anatomy directly on a body, thus speaking to his insistence on the empirical acquisition of knowledge. Much has been written on this woodcut print, but one of the most interesting and salient discussions points to the importance of the female corpse being dissected by Vesalius. By choosing to center his title page on the body of a hanged female criminal executed in Padua, Vesalius achieved several goals. He enhanced his reputation with a curious male audience, made a strong memento mori statement visibly linking birth to death, undeniably asserted his superiority over Galen in matters of female anatomy, and associated the viewer from the subject being dissected by emphasizing the gendered distance rather than the identification between male viewer and female corpse. And the female body for centuries has been seen as defective, and a lot of female anatomical parts were called monstrous, so there's actually quite a bit to be said about this kind of thing. In the Fabrica, Vesalius established a new way to anatomize and made clear from the outset that this treatise and his inquiries were distinct from his predecessors. Notably, in spite of his insistence on an empirical examination and understanding of individual bodies, Vesalius still believed in the principle of an idealized normative body. The Vesalian thrust toward a normative ideal, followed by centuries, purposefully did not take the physically deviant into account. This was not the case, however, for everyone working under this Vesalian paradigm. Concomitant with intellectual and scientific developments pertaining to an ideal human body, attention to anatomical irregularities grew from a marginal interest to a defined science. In fact, awareness of physical deviance was fed by the normative ideals promoted by Vesalius and adopted by his followers. The Vesalian body became the new standard body of knowledge, and departures from its strict norms fueled interest in anatomical deviance by creating a parallel scientific pursuit that used the same heuristic tools. Gradually, during the early modern period, all of these beliefs were fueled by medical lens. A few attempts at cataloging extraordinary humans, animals, organic matters, and fantastic beings were made throughout the 16th century. The first attempt appears to have been with the 1503 publication of a treatise on signs and wonders by the Freiburg scholar and genealogist of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian Komnenkov. In 1566, Pierre Boiestiau published his Histoire prodigieuse, in which he combined various stories from classical authors imaginary biblical occurrences of fantastic animals, along with descriptions of congenital diseases. Even though Boistuau's organizational scheme came close to an actual classification, he made no direct attempt to define categories of abnormal beings. He provided detailed descriptions and an elaboration on the ideas of the bizarre and the imaginary, but did not demonstrate scientific causality for the existence of unusual beings. In addition, the title preface dedication and the entirety of the text were in French rather than in Latin, despite the fact that Boistuau clearly meant to target an elite audience. The book is dedicated to a scientific novice, the noble Lord Jean-Pierre Simon d'Asserac, and the preface left no doubt as to the courtly pretensions of the text and illustrations. Shortly after its publication, Ambroise Paré wrote and edited several editions of the monstrous prodige, first published in 1573. Paré also chose to write in the vernacular French and was aware of the stigma this decision may leave on the scientific text. But in the preface, he insisted that his decision to write in French was a conscious one, meant to enrich the practice of medicine by adding to it the knowledge of rare things such as monsters. In addition, unlike Boistuau, whom he cited as a provider of some of his case studies, Paré provided a definition of monsters and distinguished the various terms he used. So according to Paré, and something that stays again for a long time, monsters are things that appear outside of the course of nature, with capital N, and are most often signs of some misfortune to come, such as a child who is born with one arm only, another with two heads, and other limbs that are out of the ordinary. Prodigies are things that happen against nature, such as a woman giving birth to a snake or to a dog or to anything that goes against nature. The mutilated are the blinds, one-eyed people, hunchbacks, lame people, or people having 6 fingers or toes, or less than 5 fingers or toes, or fingers and toes joined together, or arms that are too short, or noses that are set too deep, like those with crooked noses, or lips that are big and reversed, or anything that goes against nature. Again, much to be said about these descriptions and what they mean socially and politically as well. Paré's work fell within a trend that spoke to a growing interest in marvels. Indeed, the increase of published works dealing with medical cases in the 16th century signaled the rising interest of laymen and men of sciences for published accounts of various natural wonders, including monsters. His many illustrations deal with different monsters whose medical validity varied from conjoined twins to limbless individuals, and finally to imaginary hybrid creations, such as a half-man, half-piglet creature, with no noteworthy explanation beyond the plain matter-of-fact description of the two components that form his hybridity. Hybridity is a favored type of monstrousness for centuries and for many authors. Here again, a few examples, and this one in particular, which I think the marine monsters are something that is quite recurrent and very strong in centuries and in Lovecraft as well. The monstrous prodige was a step toward medicalizing the discourse on monsters and using them as an alternate body of knowledge. Tracing the etymological root attached to the word monster shows that systematic methods of inquiry used to understand monsters as phenomena outside the normal course of nature coexisted again with other science. For instance, Paré's medical assertions did not shatter his belief that monsters were a divine mark placed on nature, or might represent what happened to those who faced God's wrath. To support both these assertions, Paré recast the etymological origins of the term monster to support the theological assumptions of monsters as physical signs to be shown. The origin of the word monster is found in the Latin mostrare, to show. Paré himself discussed the monsters as being that one shows. That's the necessity of monsters. You have to show them, and in a sense you have to show them for them to exist. One of the most famous instances described by Paré was that of a conjoined twin twin sisters who were carried, and this is his words, through several cities in Italy by their poor parents, who thus earned a significant amount of money thanks to the people who were very eager to see this new spectacle of nature. The essence of the monsters as creatures to be shown is here presented as beneficial, since the conjoined twin sisters became a visible index of God's play with nature that relieved the family of distress. In addition to its tie to the verb mostrare, the noun mostro has also been related to the word monere, to inform. Hence, Paré, Boissieu, and others included the notion of warning in their definitions of monsters. In the same vein, most authors in the 16th century saw monsters as a sign of remonstrance from God. One of the first early modern authors to provide a more strictly conceived scientific treatise on monsters was Rhechette, who published the Monstrum Natura Causis. Rhechette, a physician, interestingly, from Padua, expressed his disbelief in monsters as portentous theological signs and insisted on their importance as living beings who expressed certain truth through their unusual physical appearances. In doing so, Rhechette privileged the sense of sight as a means to acquire true knowledge, since it was the outer appearance of these individuals, or creations, that justified the scientific investigations of their bodies. Rhechette saw monsters as beings whose deformities elicited the most wonder and admiration. He was not surprised that audiences were so intrigued by them and sought to understand their origins. Rhechette abandoned the idea of the monster as an ominous divine sign, justifying its existence not as a mistake made by nature, but as an expression of difference necessary in the face of adverse conditions. His work demonstrates that monsters in the 17th century began to be seen as valid variations of nature, indispensable contrasts to the normative bodies that were pushed by so many physicians and viewers. The approach adopted by Rhechette exemplifies the inchoate constructions of monsters as authoritative epistemological alternatives. Increasingly, tension between the view of monsters as medical objects of inquiry and that of monsters as theological warnings became more palpable. Although its resolution, there need be, did not imply mutual exclusivity, the position taken by anatomists and scientists for the stronger authority of methodical examination often settled the conflict, once again echoing the idea of rationalization of knowledge. Lealdo Colombo explored the anatomical anomalies of otherwise normative human beings. In Book 15 of his Anatomical, Colombo took on Vesalius' position as chair of anatomy. His medically guided approach to the study of monsters is no surprise, since he was immersed in medical treatises during his explorations of anomalous bodies. But unlike Paré or Boissieu, Colombo never mentioned monsters as portentous signs. He did not attack those who had treated them as such, but he purposefully omitted any reference to the prophetic dimension. Colombo's treatise, by virtue of its deliberate exclusion, was one of the few and first heritological treatises to deal with monsters as pathological anomalies only. Colombo's pathological representation of monsters represents a shift, placing monsters in the realm of medicine, but the opposition between medicine and the wonderful was not as clear-cut as one might imagine. So I use only very intentionally. The dissections that Colombo performed, particularly that of a hermaphrodite, and that he discusses in his book, made his series of illustrated cases valid bodies of knowledge by making him, and by proxy his readers, witnesses to the truth found in anatomizing monstrous bodies. In spite of the numerous avenues opened by treatises on monsters on the medical, theological, or philosophical front, an exact and universal name for the science of studying monsters did not appear until the 19th century. Following in the footsteps of his father, who was a renowned zoologist, Isidore Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire wrote a treatise dealing with monsters in 1832 entitled Traité de Teratologie. From the onset of his book, Saint-Hilaire positioned teratology as a distinct and separate science from physiology and related sciences. He confirmed the validity of studying monsters not only as a branch of pathology or philosophical anatomy, but as an independently justifiable inquiry. Saint-Hilaire denounced previous authors who purported to study monsters while constantly attaching them to different branches of zoology or embryology. Saint-Hilaire's work built upon centuries of inquiries. Nevertheless, he validated the study of monsters as a uniquely scientific endeavor by not only attributing an exclusive technical term to the study of monsters, but also by renouncing any kind of supernatural claim pertaining to the formation or presence of physically deviant individuals. Though Saint-Hilaire was aware of the major leap he was proposing, he was nonetheless certain about the legitimacy of his claim. He finalized the numerous attempts made before him by proposing an exhaustive study of teratology based on his ultimate goal, to understand the modification of the normal order. It is noteworthy to point out that Saint-Hilaire's effort to remove theological and supernatural components attached to the study of monsters was not entirely successful in its legacy. Even though teratology became an accepted word denoting the scientific study of monsters, some authors did take liberties with the term. They used it and they were aware of its origin. They reintroduced some of the factors Saint-Hilaire had eradicated. Some authors did not shy away from mentioning theological vectors that drove the understanding of monsters, particularly their formation and their relation to nature. They also remarked on the mythical origins of monsters repeatedly. The idea is that you can't always read these treatises and you can't always actually have monsters in your home. So what you do when you don't have them is you try to collect text and images that represents them. And that is a practice that grows increasingly more in the 16th and 17th century. The acquisition of these sources formed another dimension of what monstrousness was. The scientific authority of such texts was not meant to weigh against that of printed images. But these texts sans visual image depend on the emotional response of the reader in the same way collections of curiosities did. Such textual sources span from casual descriptions given to the French soldier by his cousin to an assortment of scientific letters addressed to the Lovecraft. In both cases, lengthy descriptions filled with numerous graphic details recall the visual techniques seen in collections of curiosity. And the idea of putting very detailed things in these descriptions is something, again, that one finds in Lovecraft, is you actually have addresses that you can follow even today. You have names of people. You have very specific dates. And this is a practice that we see very much happening in the 16th century. By providing witnesses, if you're reading the text, you become a witness. These authors insisted on the truth of their narrative, and then the question of truth is a tricky one. What is true? What you believe, or how do you define real? So that's a whole other philosophical question, but these authors insisted on the truth of their narrative. Similarly, the audience reading the text or seeing an image, or even imagining collectively a monster via an oral description, start to serve as witnesses. Understandably, the popularity of monsters within scientific circles and core culture was the main driving force behind the production and possession of textual and visual portraits of monsters. Their interest was attributed to an interest in science itself and to the prestige associated with rarity. However, portraits added another dimension to the mere wonder experience when viewing a monstrous body or a monstrous being in a collection. They allowed the viewer or the reader to stare or think at length with impunity, leisurely, and without discomfort. They also called upon the conventional sense of the viewer, who recognized the setting, the contemporary milieu of his, but could not directly associate him or herself with the subject. Akin to staring into distorted mirrors, monsters afforded both wonder and uncertainty to the viewer. While the exploration of the monstrous body could provide scientific knowledge, the official framing of that portrait, literally and figuratively, made this body of knowledge a vexed one. These visual and textual portraits played with the anatomical know thyself by questioning it. They positioned the viewer and the reader in doubtful scenarios, where inserting themselves into this conversation became increasingly uncomfortable. Michel Foucault, 20th century French philosopher, defined the notion of the human monster as one that was essentially juridical. Indeed, for Foucault, what defined the monster was the fact that he was inherently in violation of societal laws and in violation of natural laws as well. That is also probably what pushed the actual creation of monsters in any of their forms. Monsters have been, and still are, a rhetorical device that serves strategically to delineate the boundaries of the very categories to which they do not belong. In a sense, what is made visible in visualizations and descriptions of monsters are the end result of the civilizing process that tames the violence of the subversive monster. By creating one, we can control it. The descriptions become systems of conventions that integrate dissidence into a regulated frame, and are in fact violent in their impositions of rules for monsters that leave someone's imagination. Monsters have provided agency and voice to those without the direct social ability to establish their own identities. They allow for imagination, science, and humanity to find challenging and common grounds, and for author like Lovecraft to enter not only through his texts, but through the collective imaginary cultivated by all those who have adopted these monsters as their own. Thank you.